Have you ever noticed that some of the most important moments in life arrive without fanfare? A child finishes school and becomes an adult. A caterpillar disappears into a chrysalis and emerges as something altogether different. Entire forests quietly change with the seasons. Leaves fall, new growth appears, and before long, the cycle begins again. Even the stars themselves have lifetimes. They ignite, shine for millions or billions of years, and eventually exhaust the fuel that made them possible. Some collapse into white dwarfs, others explode as supernova, scattering the very elements that will one day become planets, and perhaps even people. Nature seems to move through cycles: beginnings, growth, transformation, completion. Then, another beginning. Most of these transitions happen whether we're paying attention or not. We don't wake up one morning and announce, well, today the Milky Way appears to be continuing its slow galactic rotation. It simply does. That raises an intriguing question. If life itself unfolds through seasons, could consciousness have seasons as well? According to the law of one, the answer is yes. And one of the most significant of those seasons is something Ra calls harvest. Now, for many people, that word immediately brings to mind unsettling images. Perhaps you've encountered predictions about humanity ascending into a higher dimension. Maybe you've heard stories claiming that extraterrestrials will someday arrive to separate humanity into different groups. Some interpretations describe dramatic disappearances. Others imagine catastrophic global events or a sudden evacuation of the planet. The word harvest has accumulated a surprising amount of cultural baggage over the years. But when Ra uses the term, they mean something remarkably different. Not an invasion, not a judgment day, not a mass abduction, and not even the end of the world. Instead, harvest is presented as something far quieter, far more natural. In fact, according to the law of one, harvest is no more frightening than a student completing school or a tree entering spring after a long winter. It is simply the moment when a particular stage of learning has reached its natural conclusion, whether that conclusion comes for one individual or eventually for an entire planet. Like many of the concepts we've explored throughout this series, harvest is often misunderstood because the word itself carries assumptions that the law of one never intended. Ra isn't describing consciousness being taken. They're describing consciousness becoming ready. Ready for the next lesson. Ready for the next environment. Ready for the next chapter in an unimaginably long journey that stretches far beyond a single lifetime. And perhaps that's the first great shift in perspective. Harvest isn't fundamentally about the end of something, it's about what comes next. And Earth is believed to be approaching one now. What, if anything, are we actually meant to do about it? Before we can understand when harvest occurs, we first need to understand what harvest really is. If you were to ask 10 people what the word harvest means, you'd probably receive 10 different answers. A farmer might think of gathering crops at the end of a growing season. Someone raised in a Christian tradition may think of passages describing the separation of wheat from the chaff, or the harvest of souls. Others, particularly those familiar with UFO literature, may picture extraterrestrials arriving to collect humanity before some great planetary catastrophe. And for many people who spent time on the internet during the years leading up to 2012, the word became almost inseparable from predictions of planetary ascension, ancient prophecies, dimensional shifts, and, depending on which website you visited, an alarming number of countdown timers. Apparently, the end of civilization was scheduled with impressive punctuality. The fascinating thing is that almost none of these ideas are what Ra is describing. In fact, Don Elkins asked almost immediately how harvest actually works. Ra answered, those who, finishing a cycle of experience, demonstrate various grades of distortion of understanding of thought and action that all beings are one, will be separated by their own choice into the vibratory distortion most comfortable to their mind body spirit complexes. There is an extraordinary amount contained in that single sentence. Notice the phrase, by their own choice. Harvest, according to Ra, is not something imposed upon consciousness. It isn't a tribunal. It isn't a divine courtroom. It isn't a cosmic sorting hat deciding where everyone belongs. The soul is not judged into its next experience. It naturally moves toward the environment that matches what it has become. Ra continues. This process is guarded or watched by those nurturing beings who, being very close to the law of one in their distortions, nevertheless, move towards active service. Notice again what isn't being described. No one is condemning anyone. No one is deciding who is worthy. These nurturing beings are described almost like caretakers, ensuring that the process unfolds fairly and naturally. Then Ra explains one of the most beautiful images in the entire Law of One. Thus, The illusion is created of light, or more properly, but less understandably, light love. This is in varying degrees of intensity. The spirit complex of each harvested entity moves along the line of light until the light grows too glaring, at which time the entity stops. We'll devote an entire section later to this remarkable line of light, because it's one of the most fascinating and often misunderstood parts of the harvest. For now, though, notice what Ra is saying. The entity stops, not because someone tells it to stop, not because it fails an examination. It simply reaches the intensity of light that corresponds to its present state of consciousness. The image is almost physical. Imagine walking into brighter and brighter sunlight. Eventually, your eyes reach the point where going farther becomes uncomfortable. Not because anyone pushed you back, but because you've naturally reached the level you're presently able to inhabit. Harvest works the same way. The Law of One consistently describes spiritual evolution as a matter of compatibility, not reward. That's an important distinction. Many religious traditions describe some form of final judgment. Ancient Egyptian religion envisioned the heart being weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Christianity speaks of the Last Judgment. Islam describes the Day of Judgment. Even outside religion, many people quietly carry the feeling that the universe is keeping score. Was I good enough? Did I believe the right things? Did I pass? Raw paints a surprisingly different picture. The universe is not presented as a courtroom, it's presented as a classroom. Imagine trying to enroll a 6-year-old directly into graduate school. The issue isn't whether the child is good or bad, the issue is readiness. Likewise, sending a university professor back to kindergarten wouldn't be a punishment, it simply wouldn't correspond to where that person is in their learning. According to the Law of One, densities function much the same way. Each density offers the lessons appropriate for that level of consciousness. When those lessons have genuinely been integrated, the next classroom simply becomes the natural place to continue learning, which makes one of Ra's shortest statements suddenly take on enormous significance. The third density is a choice. Just 6 words. But those 6 words explain why harvest exists at all. Because harvest is not measuring how much information we've accumulated. It isn't measuring religious affiliation. It isn't measuring intelligence. It's measuring something far deeper, the direction that consciousness has chosen to grow. And that raises the obvious question. If harvest is simply the natural graduation from one density into the next, why does an entire planet eventually reach graduation together? Why doesn't third density simply continue forever? According to Ra, the answer has remarkably little to do with humanity. It has everything to do with the rhythm of the universe itself. If harvest is simply the natural graduation from one density into the next, another question immediately follows. Why should an entire civilization eventually reach graduation at roughly the same time? Why doesn't every soul simply graduate whenever it happens to be ready? At first glance, that might seem like the fairest system. Everyone progresses at their own pace. Everyone graduates on their own schedule. But according to the Law of One, individual evolution and planetary evolution are not quite the same thing. Let's attend our imaginary university. Every student learns differently. Some absorb the material almost effortlessly. Others struggle. Some require extra time. Some unfortunately fail the course altogether. Yet, despite those differences, one thing remains true. None of the students decide when the semester ends. The academic calendar was established long before they ever entered the classroom. Whether a student earns an A, barely passes, or repeats the course next year, the bell rings for everyone on exactly the same day. Not because every student is equally prepared, but because the semester itself has reached its appointed conclusion. According to Ra, third density functions in a remarkably similar way. Individual souls continue evolving according to their own choices, but planets themselves move through vast cycles established long before any particular civilization appears upon them. Ra explains that third density experience unfolds in 3 major cycles of approximately 25,000 years each, totaling roughly 75,000 years. When Don Elkins asks why this particular period exists, Ra answers, one major cycle is approximately 25,000 of your years. There are 3 cycles of this nature during which those who have progressed may be harvested. At the end of 3 major cycles, that is, approximately between 75 and 76,000 of your years, all are harvested regardless of their progress. For during that time, the planet itself has moved through the useful part of that dimension and begins to cease being useful for the lower levels of vibration within that density. That's an astonishing statement. Notice that Ra isn't saying humanity chooses when harvest occurs, nor are they saying that every soul has finished learning after exactly 75,000 years. Instead, the classroom itself has reached the end of the semester. The planet has completed the portion of its journey that supports third density experience. Whether individual students are ready to graduate is another matter entirely. This also explains why Ra consistently describes harvest as something deeply natural, not an emergency, not a catastrophe, not a punishment. Simply the conclusion of a planetary season. Later, Ra offers one of the most memorable analogies in the entire contact. Ra says, visualize, if you will, the particular energy which, outward flowing and inward coagulating, formed the tiny realm of the creation governed by your Council of Saturn. Continue seeing the rhythm of this process. The living flow creates a rhythm which is as inevitable as one of your timepieces. Each of your planetary entities began the first cycle when the energy nexus was able in that environment to support such mind body experiences. Thus, each of your planetary entities is on a different cyclical schedule, as you might call it. The timing of these cycles is a measurement equal to a portion of intelligent energy. This intelligent energy offers a type of clock. The cycles move as precisely as a clock strikes your hour. Thus, the gateway from intelligent energy to intelligent infinity opens regardless of circumstance on the striking of the hour. What an extraordinary image! The timing is as precise as a clock. Notice the elegance of that analogy. A clock doesn't ask whether you're ready. It doesn't wait for us to finish our work. It doesn't pause because we're having a particularly difficult semester. It simply reaches the next hour. According to Ra, harvest follows the same rhythm. Not because the universe is indifferent, but because the rhythm itself is woven into creation. Earlier in the Law of One, Ra repeatedly identifies our sun as the sub-logos of the solar system, while the larger galactic intelligence functions as the logos from which our local system derives its patterns. Within that framework, the evolutionary timetable of our planetary experience isn't invented by humanity. It's part of the architecture established by the logos through the sub-logos. The cosmic clock doesn't belong to civilization. Civilization exists within the clock. And that's one of the most humbling ideas in the entire Law of One. Human history often feels immense. Empires rise and fall, religions emerge, languages evolve, entire civilizations appear, flourish, and disappear. Yet, from the perspective Ra presents, all of recorded human history occupies only the closing moments of a single third density classroom. If that perspective is even approximately correct, then the question is no longer can humanity delay harvest, nor even can humanity accelerate it. The hour arrives when the hour arrives. The real question is something different. When the bell rings, will we be ready to enter the next classroom? And according to Ra, that readiness has remarkably little to do with knowledge. It has everything to do with one decision. A decision that, according to the Law of One, is the entire purpose of third density the choice. If the clock eventually strikes the hour, what exactly is Harvest measuring? Many people imagine some sort of cosmic examination, a final report card, a checklist of good deeds weighed against bad ones. It's an understandable assumption. After all, many religious traditions describe some sort of judgment following earthly life. So naturally, we wonder how does the universe decide? According to the Law of One, that's actually the wrong question. The universe isn't deciding, you are. Not in a single dramatic moment, not during the final minutes of your life, but gradually, quietly, one decision at a time. In our previous episode exploring the densities of consciousness, we mentioned that third density occupies a unique place in the evolution of the soul. It isn't the density of love, it isn't the density of wisdom. Ra repeatedly calls it something much simpler. The third density is a choice. Just those 6 words. Yet nearly the entire purpose of human existence, according to the Law of One, is contained within those 6 words. Third density is not primarily about becoming more intelligent. It isn't about accumulating spiritual information. It isn't about learning hidden knowledge. And it certainly isn't about memorizing every session in the Law of One. Though, if you made it to session 83 without accidentally reading session 38 twice, congratulations, you're already demonstrating remarkable persistence. The purpose of third density is to choose, not merely between right and wrong, not between one religion or another, not between believing Ra or rejecting Ra, but between two fundamentally different orientations of consciousness. Will I seek primarily to serve others, or primarily to serve myself? Everything else, according to Ra, flows from that. Later in session 76, Dawn asks why this choice is so important. Ra gives what may be one of the most profound statements in the entire contact. The choice is, as you put it, the work of just a moment, but is the axis upon which the creation turns. Just pause there for a moment. The axis upon which the creation turns. What an astonishing phrase. Imagine the Earth spinning upon its axis. Every sunrise, every season, every weather system depends upon that invisible orientation. Ra suggests something similar occurs within consciousness. Our countless daily choices gradually establish an inner orientation, an axis, not something that appears overnight, but something that becomes increasingly stable over years and often, according to Ra, many lifetimes. By the end of third density, consciousness has gradually developed a preferred direction toward unity or toward separation, toward service or towards control. This is why Harvest isn't asking, how many good things did you do? It's asking something more profound. Who have you become? That distinction changes everything. Imagine two people donating the same amount of money. Outwardly, their actions appear identical. One gives quietly because another person's suffering genuinely matters. The other gives publicly because they crave admiration and influence. The action is the same. The orientation is entirely different. The law of one consistently places greater emphasis upon being rather than appearing. This also helps explain why Ra rarely discusses individual behaviors in isolation. Instead, they continually return to intention, desire, seeking, orientation. The soul is slowly becoming something, and Harvest simply reveals what that something has become. Eventually, however, Dawn asks the question nearly every reader eventually asks: how much polarization is enough? Dawn asks if more than 50% is enough to harvest. Ra answers that this is correct if the entity wishes to go to positive fourth density. Then Ra comments on the negative path. The entity who wishes to pursue the path of service to self must attain a grade of 5, that is, 5% service to others, 95% service to self. It must approach totality. The negative path is quite difficult to attain harvestability upon and requires great dedication. Then the question of why the negative path is so difficult is asked, to which Ra replies, to attain 51% dedication to the welfare of other selves is as difficult as attaining a grade of 5% dedication to other selves. The, shall we say, sinkhole of indifference is between those two. These passages have confused readers for decades, partly because of the percentages themselves, and partly because people naturally begin doing mathematics. Was helping my neighbor worth 3 points? Does holding the elevator count? If I return the shopping cart, am I harvestable now? Fortunately, the universe appears to use a more sophisticated accounting system than a loyalty rewards program. Ra is not describing arithmetic, they're describing orientation. Imagine holding a compass. The needle doesn't need to point perfectly north, it simply needs to have a clear direction. Likewise, a soul doesn't become positively harvestable because every thought is perfectly loving, nor does a negatively oriented soul become harvestable through occasional selfishness. Rather, over thousands upon thousands of ordinary moments, the compass settles. One direction becomes increasingly natural, increasingly consistent, increasingly genuine. This is why 51% often surprises people. At first glance, it almost sounds low, until we remember what Ra is actually measuring. Not isolated actions, not public appearances, not beliefs, but the genuine orientation of an entire consciousness. The negative path is astonishingly difficult to achieve, but it's just the same difficulty as the positive orientation. Ra explains that the service to self path requires approximately 95% dedication to self. Think about what that really means. Nearly every thought, nearly every relationship, every interaction must consistently reinforce separation, control, and personal power. In many ways, the negative path demands an almost unimaginable discipline, which is one reason Ra repeatedly notes how comparatively few souls successfully follow it all the way through third density. By contrast, the positive path asks something beautifully human. Not perfection, direction. A sincere movement towards recognizing the Creator in other people as much as in ourselves. And perhaps that's why Harvest is ultimately so hopeful. Because it isn't waiting for flawless people, it's waiting for people whose hearts have gradually chosen which way they wish to grow. Of course, once that orientation has been established, one final question remains: what actually happens when a soul is harvested? By now, we have a better understanding of what harvest is. It isn't an invasion, it isn't a punishment, it isn't even a reward. It is simply the natural transition from one density of experience into another. But that still leaves perhaps the most fascinating question of all: how does it actually happen? Suppose a person reaches the end of an incarnation during a harvest period. What happens next? Who decides where they go? Is there a council, a judgment, some higher intelligence reviewing every mistake we've ever made? Once again, Ra's answer is surprisingly gentle. Earlier, we read part one of the most important passages in the Law of One. Now let's hear a little more about the harvest process. Ra explains: in harvest, the entity will then transfer its indigo body into violet ray manifestation as seen in true color yellow. This is for the purpose of gauging the harvestability of the entity. After this anomalous activity has been carefully completed, the entity will move into indigo body again and be placed in the correct true color locus in space time and time space, at which time the healings and learned teachings necessary shall be completed and further incarnation needs determined. At first, that may sound extraordinarily technical. Ra frequently describes consciousness using the language of energy centers, true color bodies, and vibrational fields. Those ideas deserve episodes of their own. Fortunately, the essential idea is much simpler than the terminology might suggest. According to Ra, nothing external is trying to determine who you are. Your own consciousness already reveals it. Ra continues with one of the most beautiful descriptions anywhere in the material. In time of harvest, there are always harvesters. The fruit is formed as it will be, but there is some supervision necessary to ensure that this bounty is placed as it should be without the bruise or the blemish. There are those of three levels watching over harvest. The first level is planetary, and that which may be called angelic. This type of guardian includes the mind body spirit complex totality, or higher self, of an entity, and those inner plane entities which have been attracted to this entity through its inner seeking. The second class of those who ward this process are those of the Confederation who have the honor duty of standing in the small places at the edge of the steps of light love, so that those entities being harvested will not, no matter how confused or unable to make contact with the higher self, stumble and fall away for any reason other than the strength of the light. These Confederation entities catch those who stumble and set them aright so that they may continue into the light. The third group watching over this process is that group you call the Guardians. This group is from the octave above our own and serves in this manner as light bringers. These guardians provide the precise emissions of light love in exquisitely fastidious disseminations of discrimination, so that the precise light love vibration of each entity may be ascertained. Thus, the harvest is automatic in that those harvested will respond according to that which is unchangeable during harvest. That is the violet ray emanation. However, these helpers are around to ensure a proper harvesting so that each entity may have the fullest opportunity to express its violet ray selfhood. Just picture that scene for a moment. Not a courtroom, not a throne, not a cosmic interrogation. Instead, a path of increasing light. Compassionate beings standing nearby, not to judge, but simply to ensure that every soul is able to continue safely. It's a remarkably tender image. Ra then describes what actually determines the outcome. The spirit complex of each harvested entity moves along the line of light until the light grows too glaring, at which time the entity stops. That's it. No examination, no interrogation, no one reading aloud a list of everything you did wrong in 1987, which is probably a relief for all of us. Instead, the soul simply walks until the light becomes too intense to comfortably inhabit. Earlier in this episode, we compared it to walking into increasingly bright sunlight. But perhaps there's an even better analogy. Imagine walking into deeper and deeper water. At first, it's effortless. Then the water reaches your knees, your waist, your shoulders. Eventually, you reach a depth where you naturally stop. Not because someone whistles and tells you not to go further, but because you've reached the environment that presently suits you. According to Ra, light functions much the same way. Consciousness naturally rests within the vibration it can genuinely sustain. Nothing more, nothing less. This also explains why harvest cannot be manipulated through appearances. You cannot pretend to be more polarized than you are. You cannot convince the Guardians with persuasive arguments. You cannot recite enough spiritual vocabulary to move farther into the light. The vibration isn't being measured by another being, it is the being. In many ways, harvest resembles resonance much more than judgment. Striking a tuning fork beside another tuned to exactly the same note, and the second fork begins vibrating all by itself. Not because it has been commanded, but because resonance naturally occurs. Ra repeatedly describes consciousness in a remarkably similar way. Like naturally seeks like. Vibration seeks corresponding vibration. This is one reason the Law of One places such emphasis upon authenticity. Who we truly are matters infinitely more than who we appear to be. Another beautiful consequence follows from this. No one is accidentally misplaced. No one graduates prematurely. No one is unfairly left behind. Every consciousness simply finds the environment most compatible with its own development. And what if someone isn't ready for fourth density? This is perhaps where many viewers expect disappointing news. Instead, Ra offers something profoundly compassionate. There is no failure, only continuation. A soul that has not yet polarized sufficiently simply continues learning third density lessons. Not forever, not as punishment, but because those lessons are still exactly what that consciousness presently needs. Imagine a student finishing the school year without mastering algebra. The school doesn't expel them from education, nor does it shame them. They simply continue studying until the concepts genuinely become their own. The universe, according to Ra, appears to possess an astonishing amount of patience. In fact, patience may be one of the defining characteristics of the entire Law of One cosmology. Nothing is wasted. No sincere effort is lost. No lifetime is meaningless. Every incarnation, even the ones that seem confused, even the ones that seem ordinary, contributes to the gradual orientation of consciousness towards its eventual destination, which naturally raises another question. If some souls graduate and others continue third density elsewhere, what happens to Earth itself? Does the planet simply remain as it is? Or is Earth itself undergoing a transformation alongside those who inhabit it? If harvest determines where individual souls continue their evolution, what happens to Earth? Does the planet suddenly transform? Does everyone wake up one morning in fourth density? Does the physical world disappear? Or does the transition happen slowly enough that most people barely notice it? This is where discussions of harvest often become confusing. Several different ideas are frequently compressed into a single dramatic event: the harvest of individual consciousness, the end of Earth's third density cycle, the activation of fourth density vibrations, and the eventual habitation of Earth as a fully fourth density world. But Ra does not appear to describe all of these as occurring in one instantaneous flash. Instead, the Law of One presents Earth as being in a long transition between two densities. The clock may strike the hour, but the classroom does not disappear the instant the bell rings. The students still gather their belongings, the halls gradually empty, the next class begins arriving, and somewhere, inevitably, someone is still asking whether the final was open book. According to Ra, Earth's transition is unusually difficult to estimate because humanity's collective consciousness is not moving in a clear, harmonious direction. When Dawn asks how long the transition from third to fourth density will take, Ra answers, "This is difficult to estimate due to the uncharacteristic anomalies of this transition. There are, at this space time nexus, beings incarnate which have begun fourth density work. However, the third density climate of planetary consciousness is retarding the process. At this particular nexus, the possibility probability vortices indicate somewhere between 100 and 700 of your years as transition period. This cannot be accurate due to the volatility of your peoples at this space time. Harvest may mark the end of a cycle. The full transformation of a planetary environment is another matter. Think again about the changing seasons. There may be an exact astronomical moment when winter becomes spring, but that does not mean every trace of winter instantly vanishes. Snow may remain on the ground. Some trees may still be bare. Cold winds may continue for weeks. Yet beneath the surface, the new season has already begun. According to the Law of One, Earth is undergoing something similar. Ra describes fourth density not merely as a social change or an improvement in human morality, but as an actual vibrational spectrum into which the planet has moved. In session 17, Ra says, "The fourth density is a vibrational spectrum." Ra then explains that Earth is becoming what they call fourth density magnetized. Within this cosmology, our planet is not simply hosting beings who may graduate. The planet itself is being reconfigured to support a new density of experience. Ra associates this process with changing electromagnetic patterns, in streaming cosmic forces, and an increasing number of incarnate people possessing the potential for fourth density awareness. This does not mean that a second Earth suddenly materializes beside the first like a replacement planet waiting in storage. Ra's description is stranger and considerably more subtle. They suggest that multiple vibrational expressions of Earth can coexist. The first density Earth of earth, air, fire, and water remains. The second density Earth of plants and animals remains. The familiar third density, or yellow ray, Earth remains active during the transition. And alongside these, a fourth density green ray Earth is gradually forming. Ra describes it as another sphere that is largely congruent with the Earth that we already know. In simpler language, the densities overlap spatially, while remaining distinct vibrationally. They occupy, in some sense, the same planetary location, but they do not offer the same kind of experience. This is difficult to visualize because our minds naturally imagine dimensions as physical places. One planet here, another planet somewhere else, one floor below, one floor above. Ra's framework seems closer to multiple radio signals occupying the same room. Different stations pass through the same space. Which one you receive depends upon what your radio is capable of tuning into. The fourth density Earth is not necessarily far away. It is simply not fully accessible through an ordinary third density vehicle. And that brings us to one of the most unusual elements of the transition, what Ra calls dual activated bodies. According to the Law 1, some beings incarnating during the planetary transition possess bodies capable of participating in both third and fourth density vibrations. Don struggled with this concept, and to his credit, openly admitted it. At one point, he apologizes for asking what he calls rather dumb questions, which should reassure the rest of us. When a professor of physics and engineering who is conducting an extraterrestrial metaphysical interview has to stop and say, I don't think I'll ever fully understand this, we are officially allowed to find the subject confusing. Ra explains that these transitional entities incarnate in what may be called a double body in activation. The body still belongs to third density physical experience. It ages, it experiences ordinary biological limitations, and it eventually dies according to third density necessities. But it also contains the potential to appreciate the increasing fourth density vibrations without the incompatibility that a normal third density electrical system would experience. Ross states, this transitional body is one which will be, shall we say, able to appreciate fourth density vibratory complexes as the in-streaming increases without the accompanying disruption of the third density body. If a third density entity were, shall we say, electrically aware of fourth density in full, the third density electrical fields would fail due to incompatibility. Ra is not describing two complete physical bodies stacked inside one another, nor are these people automatically enlightened. They are not necessarily able to read minds, bend spoons, see hidden dimensions, or explain why printers stop working only when something is urgent. The term refers to a transitional bodily and energetic capacity. These incarnating entities are beginning fourth density experience while still living within a troubled third density environment. And according to Ra, this creates an opportunity for service. Because someone possessing a greater natural responsiveness to compassion may be able to bring those qualities into a world still struggling with separation. Ra describes the purpose of this combined activation as allowing such beings some conscious awareness of fourth density understandings that ordinary third density consciousness cannot easily remember beneath the veil. This allows fourth density experience to begin with an added opportunity to dwell within a difficult third density world and offer love and compassion within it. That does not mean every compassionate child born during the transition should be labeled as fourth density entity, nor does it give a useful reason to categorize strangers. The Law of One repeatedly redirects attention away from identifying the supposed spiritual status of others. The practical question is not which people have dual activated bodies, it is what qualities are beginning to emerge through humanity. Greater sensitivity, an increasing discomfort with cruelty and unnecessary hierarchy, a deeper awareness of interconnectedness, an instinctive concern for the planet, an inability to feel completely at home within systems built upon competition and separation. None of those qualities proves anything metaphysical, but within Ra's framework, they would be consistent with a population beginning to encounter fourth density vibrations. It is also important to distinguish dual activated entities from wanderers. A wanderer is described as a being from a higher density who voluntarily incarnates into third density body and passes through the forgetting, as we've discussed extensively in a previous episode. A dual activated entity, by contrast, is associated with the emerging fourth density population itself. One has returned from a more advanced density to serve, the other is beginning the next density through planetary transition. They may share sensitivities, they may both feel strangely out of place, but Ra does not describe them as the same phenomenon, and neither category exempts anyone from the confusion of human life. A dual activated body does not arrive with an instruction manual. A wanderer does not wake up knowing its home address somewhere near the constellation of the Pleiades. Everyone still has taxes, everyone still has relationships, everyone still has to decide what to do when they see someone begging for money on the street. The veil continues to preserve free will. Perhaps the most important correction, however, concerns physical death. Some interpretations of ascension imagine that people will simply transform their present third density bodies into immortal fourth density bodies. Others predict a sudden disappearance in which the spiritually prepared vanish while everyone else remains behind. Ra describes neither scenario. Dawn asks directly whether third density physical bodies must undergo what we call death before inhabiting the fourth density sphere. Ra answers this in the affirmative. Even dual activated bodies, according to Ra, die according to third density necessities. The transition does not bypass death. Rather, death remains the doorway through which consciousness changes its bodily vehicle. This makes Harvest far less visually dramatic than many modern ascension stories suggest. There may be no moment when the sky opens, no global flash that transforms everybody at once, no disappearance leaving neatly folded clothing behind. Instead, human beings continue to be born, they live, they make choices, they die, and beyond physical death, each consciousness continues in the density appropriate to its development. Meanwhile, the population capable of sustaining third density experience gradually diminishes. The fourth density population gradually emerges, and the planet completes its transition over a span that Rod describes as potentially lasting centuries. Eventually, the familiar yellow ray Earth enters what Ra calls potentiation. It does not cease to exist, but it is no longer actively inhabited by the principal stage for third density experience. The green ray Earth becomes the active environment for the next chapter. Ra also makes another important distinction concerning polarity. Earth's fourth density expression is described as positive. Positively harvestable entities may remain within Earth's planetary influence for fourth density experience. Negatively harvested entities continue upon an appropriate negative fourth density planet, and those who still require third density experience continue elsewhere upon another third density world. Once again, no one is abandoned, no one is discarded, no one is left wandering the cosmos because they failed to submit the correct spiritual paperwork. Every consciousness continues, but not necessarily in the same classroom. Seen this way, the transformation of Earth is not one event. It is a long changing of the guard, one density slowly withdrawing from active use, another gradually becoming inhabitable. Old vibrations persisting while new ones strengthen, a planet standing, for a time, between worlds. And perhaps this explains why the present moment can feel so contradictory. Compassion seems to be increasing, and so does division. Old systems are being questioned and fiercely defended. Humanity appears more interconnected than ever, yet also more fragmented. Ra also suggests that this transitional period is attracting an unusually large number of incarnations. When Dawn asks how many wanderers are presently incarnate on Earth, Ra replies, the number is approximate due to a heavy influx of those birthed at this time due to an intensive need to lighten the planetary vibration and thus aid in harvest. The number approaches 65 million. Ra goes even further in session 17, explaining that incarnation itself changes as harvest approaches. Souls needing the greatest opportunity to polarize are given priority to incarnate, a process Ra calls seniority by vibration. The seniority by vibration is the preferential treatment, shall we say, which follows the ways of the law of one, which encourages harvestable individuals, each individual becoming aware of the time of harvest and the need on a self level to bend mind, body, and spirit towards the learned teaching of those lessons, is given priority in order that this entity may have the best possible chance, shall we say, of succeeding in this attempt. Rather than describing the closing of a school, Ra describes something closer to its busiest semester. As the cycle draws to a close, Opportunities for growth become unusually concentrated, and many souls choose, or are given the opportunity, to incarnate precisely because the lessons of third density are nearing their conclusion. The new season draws nearer, but the remnants of winter have not yet melted. And that may be why harvest should never be mistaken for a promise that Earth will suddenly become peaceful. The planet may be entering fourth density, but humanity still has to decide what it will bring to the transition, which leads us to one of the most important misconceptions surrounding the entire subject. Because in popular UFO mythology, the word harvest often means something far more frightening, something being done to humanity. But when Ra speaks of harvest, no extraterrestrial civilization arrives to collect us. No one takes possession of the soul, and no spacecraft carries the chosen away. The harvest of the Law of One is not an alien harvest. For a word that appears only a handful of times in the Law of One, harvest has accumulated an astonishing number of meanings. Spend enough time exploring UFO forums, New Age communities, or speculative websites, and you'll eventually encounter some version of the same story. Extraterrestrials are coming. Humanity will be separated into different groups. Some people will be taken, others will be left behind. Sometimes the story involves benevolent civilizations rescuing humanity. Sometimes it involves darker narratives claiming that human beings are themselves being harvested for emotional energies, genetics, or some other purpose. These ideas have become so widespread that many people encounter the word harvest long before they ever encounter the Law of One, which makes an important clarification necessary. Ra never describes harvest as an extraterrestrial operation. In fact, throughout the material, harvest is presented as an entirely natural process. Notice how often Ra speaks in the language of resonance, vibration, compatibility, light. There is remarkably little emphasis placed upon intervention. The Confederation does not decide who graduates. The Guardians do not decide who graduates. Even your higher self does not decide who graduates. Each consciousness simply reaches the vibration it has genuinely become. Earlier, we heard Ra describe the soul walking the line of light until the light becomes too glaring to comfortably continue. That image is worth remembering. No one is pushing the soul forward, no one is holding it back. The process is almost entirely self determined. This also explains why Ra consistently avoids dramatic language. Harvest is not portrayed as the destruction of one civilization and the triumph of another, nor is it portrayed as a reward for belonging to a particular religion, nation, philosophy, or spiritual movement. Instead, it is simply growth. Imagine an orchard. When autumn arrives, the apples that are ripe are gathered. The apples that are not yet ripe are not condemned. They're simply not ready. No farmer becomes angry with fruit for requiring another season. Likewise, according to Ra, consciousness develops according to its own rhythm. Some souls become harvestable during one planetary cycle, others require another. The Creator appears to be in no hurry. This patient perspective stands in sharp contrast to many modern narratives built around urgency and fear. If every headline insists that time is running out, the Law of One quietly replies, the opportunity to polarize exists now. It existed before this incarnation, it will exist after this incarnation. Harvest may mark the conclusion of one classroom, but the school itself continues forever. In fact, Ra repeatedly reminds Dawn that the universe is astonishingly generous. There is no shortage of third density worlds, no shortage of opportunities, no shortage of future incarnations through which consciousness may continue learning. The consequence of not graduating is not eternal punishment, it is simply another semester. That idea may actually be one of the most hopeful aspects in the entire Law of One. Many spiritual traditions have taught humanity to fear getting it wrong, fear making the wrong choice, fear missing the opportunity, fear arriving too late. Ra paints a very different picture. There is urgency, but not panic, importance, but not fear, opportunity, but never coercion. Perhaps that's because genuine spiritual growth cannot be forced. Love freely chosen is infinitely different from love demanded. Which brings us to something that often surprises first time readers of the Law of One. If harvest is so natural, if it is so patient, why does Ross spend so much time encouraging us to seek at all? Why does any of this matter today? The answer returns us to the very heart of third density, not the calendar, not the percentages, not even harvest itself, but the countless ordinary choices that quietly determine the kind of consciousness we're becoming. By now, you may have noticed something surprising. Throughout this entire discussion, Ra has spent little time talking about the future. Yes, we've discussed planetary cycles, we've explored densities, we've looked at cosmic timelines stretching back tens of thousands of years. But whenever Dawn asks what humanity should actually do, Ra almost always redirects the conversation back to the present moment. In session 14, after explaining that harvest is already underway, Dawn naturally becomes interested in dates, transitions, and planetary changes. Ra's response is unexpectedly personal. The harvest is now. There is not at this time any reason to include efforts along these distortions toward longevity, but rather to encourage distortions toward seeking the heart of self. For this, which resides clearly in the violet ray energy field, will determine the harvesting of each mind body spirit complex. There is something wonderfully grounding about that answer. Notice what Ra does not recommend: stockpiling food, searching for hidden locations, preparing for catastrophe, trying to predict exact dates. Instead, seek the heart of self. It's a phrase that deserves to be read slowly, because it quietly shifts the entire focus of Harvest. The real preparation isn't external, it's internal. Earlier in this series, when we explored Catalyst, we discussed the idea that every experience presents an opportunity, not because every hardship is secretly good, but because every experience invites a response. Harvest brings that idea into even sharper focus. If third density truly exists to make the choice, then every ordinary day becomes another opportunity to make it. When someone speaks harshly to you, what grows stronger, compassion or resentment? When success arrives, does it deepen gratitude or inflate pride? When someone disagrees with you, do you become curious or defensive? When no one is watching, who do you choose to become? These are not merely ethical questions. According to Ra, they are the very substance from which polarization is formed. The choice is rarely made during life's dramatic moments. It's made while raising children, driving to work, caring for aging parents, helping a stranger, apologizing when we're wrong, forgiving when we would rather remain angry, patiently listening when speaking would be easier. The remarkable thing about the Law of One is that it never suggests spiritual evolution requires withdrawing from ordinary life. Quite the opposite. Ordinary life is the curriculum. That perspective also changes how we think about success. If harvest is determined by the orientation of consciousness, then spiritual progress becomes almost invisible. It isn't measured by how many books we've read, how many crystals we own, or whether we've learned to pronounce mind body spirit complex without taking a breath. It is measured moment by moment by the gradual direction of the heart. Perhaps that's why Ra consistently returns to one theme above almost every other: seeking, not certainty, seeking. Throughout the contact, Ra repeatedly praises sincere seeking far more than accumulated knowledge. A person honestly striving to understand, to love, to forgive may be much farther along than someone capable of quoting every session from memory. Knowledge informs, seeking transforms. This also sheds light on something we've explored in several previous episodes: the veil of forgetting. At first glance, the veil seems to be like an obstacle. Why would we willingly incarnate without remembering who we are? But now we can begin to see another possibility. Without the veil, the choice would hardly be a choice at all. If we knew beyond doubt that every person was literally another expression of ourselves, compassion would become almost automatic. Forgiveness would become logical. Faith would become unnecessary. Instead, third density invites us to choose love without certainty, to choose compassion without proof, to seek unity, even while surrounded by the convincing illusion of separation. Perhaps that is why Ra places such extraordinary importance upon free will. Love that cannot be refused is no longer love, it is programming. Harvest, then, is not measuring whether we discovered the correct philosophy, it is quietly revealing what we freely became. Whether or not one accepts the law of one's cosmology, I think there is something deeply beautiful about that idea. Not because it predicts the future, but because it changes how we experience the present. Imagine waking tomorrow morning believing that every interaction, every inconvenience, every unexpected kindness, every difficult conversation was another opportunity to gently orient your own consciousness. You probably wouldn't become perfect, neither would I. You'd still become impatient in traffic, still forget birthdays, still say things you wish you could take back. The law of one doesn't ask us to become flawless. It asks us to keep choosing again and again and again. Because according to Ra, those countless ordinary choices eventually become something extraordinary. They become who we are. At the beginning of this episode, we asked the simple question: does consciousness have seasons? According to the law of one, it does. Not seasons measured by weather, but by awareness, by growth, by the gradual unfolding of the soul through experiences that often seem ordinary while we're living them. Harvest, then, is not the end of the story. It is simply the end of one chapter, like graduation. When a student walks across a stage to receive a diploma, no one imagines that learning has ended. If anything, the graduation simply marks the beginning of a different kind of education. The classroom changes, the lessons become more complex, the opportunities become greater, but the journey itself continues. Perhaps that is why the law of one presents harvest with so little fear. Again and again, Ra describes a universe that is astonishingly patient. No soul is abandoned, no sincere effort is wasted, no lifetime disappears into meaninglessness. Every incarnation, every catalyst, every act of love, every failure honestly learned from, becomes part of something much larger than a single human lifetime. One of the things I've always appreciated about the Law of One is that it quietly removes the pressure to become spiritually extraordinary. It doesn't ask us to become famous teachers, powerful mystics, or perfect human beings. Instead, it asks us a much more difficult question: who are you becoming? Not when life is easy, but when it isn't. Who are you becoming when no one notices? When no one applauds? When no one is keeping score? Maybe that is why Ross spends little time encouraging us to watch the sky for signs of harvest. Instead, they continually direct attention inward, toward the heart, toward seeking, toward the daily choices that slowly shape consciousness. If the law of one is correct, harvest is not only determined by a calendar, it is revealed through character, not by what we claim to believe, but also by what we consistently choose to become. That may be one of the most hopeful ideas in the entire material, because it means that preparing for harvest does not require secret knowledge. It does not require belonging to a particular religion. It does not require convincing anyone else that Ra was correct. The opportunity exists in places we often overlook: a quiet act of forgiveness, choosing honesty when deception would be easier, offering compassion when judgment feels justified, listening instead of reacting, helping someone who can offer nothing in return. Thousands of moments that may appear completely insignificant, yet which gradually orient an entire soul. Earlier in this series, we explored Catalyst and asked whether every experience might contain an opportunity for growth. We explored the veil of forgetting and considered why certainty was hidden from us. We explored the densities and saw consciousness unfolding like notes within a great cosmic octave. Harvest gathers all of those ideas together, not into prophecy, but into a purpose. Maybe that purpose has never been to predict the future. Maybe it has been to illuminate the present. Whether or not the Law of One accurately describes the architecture of reality, its central invitation remains surprisingly practical. Live today in a way that the person you are becoming tomorrow will quietly thank you for. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of harvest. The more we become preoccupied with when it happens, the easier it becomes to overlook how we prepare. Not through fear, not through urgency, not through endlessly calculating dates, but through the ordinary work of opening the heart, one interaction, one decision, one act of service at a time. Perhaps that's the quiet beauty of harvest. It doesn't suddenly begin on the day the clock strikes the hour. In a sense, it's been unfolding all along. If the law of one is correct, then harvest is not simply something waiting for us in the future. It is something we are preparing for every single day, whether that preparation is conscious or not. Maybe that is why Ra describes third density as being so brief. Not because it is unimportant, but because every classroom eventually reaches its final lesson. The bell rings, the semester ends, and each student stands up carrying only one thing that truly mattered. Not the dates they memorized, not the theories they debated, but the person they became while they were there. So maybe the important question isn't when will the harvest come? Maybe it's the question we've been quietly asking throughout this entire episode. If today was another opportunity to become the next version of yourself, which direction would you choose? Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.